Let's see what Potsdam 100 speed film from Lomography looks like. I wanted to do some more film comparisons to Tri-X like I began earlier in the year. But to keep things consistent, rather than do them every now and then, I went ahead and got 49 different film stocks. Everything I could get in 35mm from B&H and Freestyle. So unless they were out of stock, I got a roll of it. Now, if this part of the video seems familiar, it's because I'm using this portion of the video for all 49 of them rather than record it 49 times. So if you want to skip ahead to the H&D curves or the prints, time codes are right over here. For those of you that haven't seen this part of the video before, here's what I've done. So I wanted to use each film with the exact same shot, which is a headshot of me with a Kodak Gray Card Plus, which happens to have a red, blue, and green patch, a cyan, magenta, yellow patch, and then a dark and a neutral flesh tone. Then, with those shots taken, I bracketed every shot in third of a stop so that we can make sure we have a negative of equal shadow density to the base target film of Tri-X. Now, the reason I use Tri-X is because it's just been around for a long time and it's a very popular film. So it's a good base film to compare everything to. Then, once everything was developed, which was developed in D-76 at stock for the manufacturer's recommended time, I printed everything on Ilford using the exact same aperture, contrast settings, developer, and everything. The only thing I changed was my exposure time, and that was to make sure that I compensated for any base fog variation from one film stock to another. Other than that, everything was left the same so that we can have a comparison of just the qualities of the film. Now, there's going to be some differences in contrast, especially on the high end, and that's because the manufacturers getting their development time may not have used the same target that Kodak used for Tri-X. And that's okay. We're not looking at the overall contrast for everything. What we're really looking at is grain characteristics, tonality, how the film treats the shadows versus the highlights, that sort of thing. And we're looking at spectral sensitivity, thus the Gray Card Plus, rather than just a regular Gray Card. So we're going to go ahead and look at H&D curves, which if you saw one of my earlier videos on sensitometry, I like to use pen and paper and make my graphs. However, my wife was really ready to make sure I was done with this project. So she put everything into a spreadsheet for you all. So even though I don't like them, I want to show them to you thanks to her. Then we're going to go ahead and look at the prints side by side with the same print made from Tri-X. And from there, you can decide if you like the film and if you want to go and use it. So let's go ahead and take a look at the curves, and then we'll go to the prints. Our Tri-X represented in blue, Lomo Potsdam, whatever his name is, 100 in red. So the overall curves overlap quite a bit, but we do have a little bit of shouldering at the top end, but the bottom end, we have a more graceful curve on the toe. So we may not have as good shadow separation as Tri-X, but the overall curve, very similar. So I think print performance is going to be very similar. We might see a little bit less separation at the top end where it starts to shoulder, but at the top end, I don't know, it may be pretty close. So let's go ahead, look at these prints and see how close they really are. Here we have our Tri-X 400 and our Lomo Potsdam 100. Now, I am guessing on the pronunciation of this film. For all I know, it could be Potsdam. I don't know. Okay. First couple of impressions. One, I've got this long scratch down through the emulsion of the film. There's no other film on here with save one, which is also Lomography, that has a scratch through the emulsion. So nothing, since both of these were in the middle of the whole project, there's nothing in the camera that could have caused that without causing that on everything. So I think it's just indicative of the kind of film that we're going to get from lomography. There is this big giant watermark through the shot. That's on me and my photo flow and drawing setup of trying to do all these in the shortest amount of time possible. So let's ignore those and move on to the actual film. First impression, it is developed properly. In fact, I've got almost exactly the same shade of white in the highlight of my gray card, but this does look more contrasty. And that is because we are getting that really sloping shadow area where our tones just aren't separating in these low areas. So my density here and on the other side are pretty much the same, but I'm just not getting a separation. Once I get one stop more exposure here, I'm getting a little bit lighter gray. That same one stop exposure here is not giving me a lighter shade of gray. So my blacks are kind of blocking up. Spectral sensitivity, I've got these three patches came out the same. The red's a little bit lighter. These three patches the same. Cyan's a little darker. We can see that here in my cyan shirt. I wouldn't necessarily say though that it worked out well for the skin texture. The background being a medium gray did come out darker here, but again, I think that's more of our lack of tonal separation. Okay, let's go ahead and get a little bit closer and look at the fine grain and details of our prints. Looking at the grain structure, I would say we are slightly grainier than our average 100 speed film from some of the big companies. I would say our grain here, with this being a 100 speed film, is actually fairly close to our 400 speed Tri-X. The shadow separation is a bit poorer, as we can see under my eye, where the details don't quite come through as clearly in the shaded sections. Here, looking at the fine detail of the fabric of my shoulder, it is still bringing in those sharp details as it silhouettes against the background. We still get a pretty good shot of that smooth background. This was exposed as an ISO 80 speed, so I did lose a third of a stop in order to get the right shadow detail. That is something to keep in mind. So it did not quite get full film speed. It did have a little bit higher fog than normal, but nowhere near as bad as the 400 speed, which we'll talk about when we look at that one. All right, let's look at the other shoulder. Here, with the detail of the fabric of the shirt, we have nice sharp detail in the ribbed portion of the collar. We can see the seam along the shoulder really well. The detail of the thread comes out well, and the texture of the weave of the fabric turns out really, really well. So we are getting really good detail, nice and sharp with that 100 speed or 80 speed grain. So that's good. It's not being obscured, even though it is slightly large for its relative speed. All right, let's look at the face up in the lighted side. And here we can see the texture of the skin under my eye, up in my forehead. It is turning out a good, sharp performance. We're just not getting that separation in the shadows, though I do think we get decent separation in the highlights. So that's a long sloping toe up to a nice straight line portion, more or less up through the mid and highlight areas. So a little bit difference in curve function, how that plays out in real life. Otherwise, I think it's a fairly good film. I think though, for the performance, particularly with that shadow separation, you could, for the same money, get a better 100 speed film. Ultra Fine 100 is a pretty good film. Of course, Kent Mere has a good 100. Ilford has good 100. So there's, I think, better options given the price of this film from Lomography. All right, that's pretty much it for this week. I appreciate you taking the time to watch. If you would like to help support this channel, you can go to my Patreon page. You can get lab towels, t-shirts, and prints from the links down in the description. Thanks for spending your time watching this comparison, and we will see you next time.